So post-traumatic growth is the positive change that can happen in the aftermath of traumatic events. They said, this is too horrible for something good not to come of this, but to maybe be of service in some way to other people who are struggling, some kind of meaning and purpose, even if it doesn't quite match up to what you've lost. You just can't go back to your old perspective. You can't go back in time and redo this and make things the way you want it to be. You can't go through these kinds of events and remain unchanged. You can't go back to square one, status quo, after having gone through things like this. You're going to change. So you don't have that choice. But you have a choice about how it's going to go into the future in your life.
I'm Neal Tricarico, and my wife, Samara, and I are grateful you're here for this unique podcast experience. We share the story of the loss of our son, Anthony, the movement that has grown out of the unimaginable grief, and the legacy we're building so that no teen ever feels this alone or lost again. We're here to give parents the resources to support their children and the communities around them, because it truly takes a tribe.
The Endurant Show is a testament to post-traumatic growth, the belief that even in the aftermath of deep grief, healing and purpose can emerge. It's a space for truth, connection, and hope, where real conversations around mental health, autism, suicide prevention, and resilience take center stage.
Healing doesn't always start with a diagnosis. It often starts with being heard, and we've created a community just for that.
Each episode, we sit down with teens, parents, experts, and advocates to share honest stories, tools, and resources. Because we believe that awareness is the cure, you don't have to hold your grief alone, and you don't have to run from it.
Through these conversations, we're building a community grounded in understanding, support, and lasting change. If you've ever felt alone, unheard, or unsure of how to keep going, this space is for you. Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge why this episode feels especially close to my heart. My family and I are deeply in the middle of our grief. We're not over it. Yet from this place, we've learned so much about how trauma shapes growth. We're living that growth every day, building a nonprofit, creating this movement and show, while still carrying the loss of our son, Anthony. Right now, more than ever, the world is reckoning with trauma. From the pandemic's widespread impact to ongoing social unrest and personal crises, people everywhere are asking, how do we not just survive trauma, but grow because of it? It's a question that's capturing attention from therapists to spiritual leaders, from scientists to storytellers. That's why I'm honored to have today's guest, Dr. Richard Tedeschi, here with us. He's the psychologist who coined the term post-traumatic growth some 30 years ago, and his groundbreaking research helps explain that growth isn't about bouncing back to who we were, but about moving forward into someone new, a self shaped not only by pain, but by deeper meaning, purpose, and connection. Dr. Tedeschi has spent decades studying how people change after profound trauma, from personal loss to life-threatening experiences, and how his work now supports veterans, first responders, and others through his leadership at the Boulder Crest Institute for Post-Traumatic Growth. In this conversation, we'll explore what post-traumatic growth really means and how it can emerge even while grief is still raw, as it is in our case. We'll be reflecting on our own story as a living example of what Dr. Tedeschi's framework helps explain, gaining insight into what's unfolding in that space between loss and transformation. And I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you today. Welcome to the Endurant Show, Dr. Tedeschi.
Thank you, Neal. I look forward to talking with you and knowing that your audience will be listening in and hopefully gaining something useful from our conversation.
Undoubtedly they will. So thank you. So Dr. Tedeschi, many people believe trauma simply breaks us, but your work shows it can also be a catalyst for deep transformation. And before we dive in, can you help us understand what post-traumatic growth really means? how you've defined it and how it challenges the traditional view of trauma. I've heard you share it so many times, and it's so beautiful in its simplicity.
Well, it is, as you say, fairly simple because it's an old human experience that goes back as far as we know about human beings. It's something that's been written about in the literatures of the great world religions and philosophers. And so this is nothing new, but as you say, I coined the term working with my colleague Lawrence Calhoun at UNC Charlotte to help psychologists focus on this different perspective on the aftermath of trauma. So post-traumatic growth is the positive change that can happen in people in the struggle that they go through in the aftermath of traumatic events. And it's a transformative experience where people really get the sense that they've changed in some ways that are enduring. And hence your podcast, the endurance, right? It's the endurance of this, but it's an enduring change that really seems to break down into 5 different kinds of growth that we've discovered. And I want to point out that these kind of discoveries simply come from listening to people tell their stories about the aftermath of trauma. And the first kinds of people we talked to back over 30 years ago now were people who had suffered physical disabilities in adulthood, become paralyzed or blinded or whatnot, and also bereaved people. And I want to tell you, just to start, Neal, that one of the reasons that I agreed to do this show is because I spent 25 years working for a nonprofit that served bereaved families. And so I sat with bereaved parents for many years in weekly support groups. And so your situation, of course, has a special place for me in my professional career and my personal experience. And people like you have informed me about this work. This is kind of where it started. So getting back to the 5 different ways that people talk about, they grow, and we can talk about them in depth, but I'll just kind of list them.
Please.
One is deeper personal relationships. Another is greater personal strength. Another is new possibilities, a greater appreciation for life, and spiritual and existential change. So those are the 5 categories. So hopefully with those kind of names, you get a sense of them, but we can certainly talk more in depth.
Yes, I would love to. And what's so powerful and profound as we go deeper into them is, unbeknownst to my wife and I, until we learned of the framework, we've been blessed to experience them. And before we dive into each of them, I'm just curious, since you've been a pioneer in this field for decades now, moving from that clinical work to founding the Boulder Crest Institute, could you share a little bit about your journey and why you were drawn to growth after trauma?
I guess I started to think more deeply and carefully about the reason I became a psychologist. This is when I was on the faculty at UNC Charlotte. I was sort of in the beginning phases of my career. And I was trying to think, well, why am I doing this? What is it that I really want to learn most about and have the opportunity to study in depth? And it's how people become wise, where wisdom comes from. And in talking to my colleague, Lawrence Calhoun, we thought, well, the psychology literature really didn't have a whole lot to say about that. I mean, you find it in philosophy and religion, but not so much in psychology, at least at the time. So we wanted to sort of dive into that, and we thought that people who had gone through some kind of suffering probably have something to say, at least some of them might, about how to handle suffering and maybe in the aftermath of that, something about how to live well. So that's why we went to some of the sufferers, but especially people who were doing well and had somehow managed to get through horrendous experiences with some grace and showed that they could live life in some very meaningful ways in the aftermath of their suffering. So that's how we kind of got started on it.
Well, I just want to thank you and your partner for leaning into that, because I don't know how it was 30 years ago, but here today, it seems by and large, and not in any blaming sort of way or misunderstanding sort of way, people don't want to explore that. It's messy and uncomfortable, and just the fact and idea that you two hypothesize this as some aspect of living well, which I love that concept that I've read and explored with you. Just so grateful that you both have. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, in the mental health literature, there is a lot of attention paid in recent times to trauma. People talk about trauma a lot, but they usually talk about it in terms of the disabling version of traumatic events and how people become victims and all the different kinds of symptoms that we can suffer. And I'm not saying that those things aren't important or don't exist. They certainly do, and we wouldn't want to we wouldn't want to miss the ways that we can treat those kinds of symptoms and difficulties more successfully. But I always thought that there was something else going on there that we haven't paid as much attention to. And that's why we've been doing this work on post-traumatic growth in the past decades here.
It's so powerful, and I'm so grateful that you did. And I wanted to just briefly share about our son Anthony's story.
Yes.
Anthony is our beloved son, and my wife and I had difficulty having children, and we were so grateful when he came into our lives, and it's been an absolute blessing and continues to be. And Anthony was diagnosed with and lived with high-functioning autism spectrum disorder. I've come to learn to drop the D, because by naming it in that way, I think it's important to name things, but I've come to realize, unfortunately, after the fact, by that naming that disorder and learning about it, I've experienced how we kind of contributed in some way to that naming and the services that he went and got, shaping a feeling of that he had to do things to then become normal. That wasn't really where I intended to go with this. But despite all that, he had a beautiful life. He was beloved by his friends. One of the things they said, he would have difficulty making friends, may end up getting bullied. Those things never came to fruition for him. In fact, he was able to develop meaningful, strong friendships, so much so that his friends are just blown away. If this could happen to him, it could happen to anybody. But with that high-functioning autism came a black and white thinking. And as he got older and into his teen years, during the pandemic, and not blaming the pandemic, he fell into depression. That was very hard for him. That's when we first became aware of his suicidal ideation. And it was a 2-year journey of trying to save his life, when he himself wanted to volunteer, help people with suicide prevention. But what we came to realize is that he was very high achieving, 4.6 grade point average, a ton of friends, was doing Spartan races and marathons and had jobs. And despite all that, took his life. And that's the background about him. But what happened next was, after he took his life, a passerby found him. He had hung himself, and first responders were able to revive him. But he had significant brain injuries and was hospitalized at Children's Hospital. And that started this 9-week journey for my wife and I and our daughter and my parents and our family during Anthony's hospitalization. And at first, we were paralyzed by the shock and trauma of the loss. All we had to do was to make decisions about the next move to maybe save his life. And somebody a client of mine offered up a prayer circle. She called it an all faiths welcome prayer circle. And something very profound happened that first evening. About 75 people came, about half of whom we didn't even know. But through the lens of their religion, whether it be, Jesus died on the cross so that Anthony could. The Zohar explains Anthony's favor because in the Buddhist tradition, it is experienced this way, or non-belief sharing. One thing that my family and I experienced was through those filters of their religion, their beliefs, what was received from us was pure love and connection and community. And it impacted Anthony's healing in some miraculous ways that enabled us to spend more time with him. But what it also opened up for us was each week someone else offered to lead that circle, and more people came, and more people came that we didn't know every Sunday night. And I don't remember the moment or moments, but it led us to start sharing more vulnerably. So we were sharing about his journey, its impact on us individually. And then we started to receive feedback from others, how it was helping them. And my wife and I were always debating, these people were sharing with us, but it was helping us so much. So we came out of the fetal position in the corner and we're going through this transformation. So all that to say is a dear friend of ours, David G., called me one day and he said, "Hey, have you ever heard of this concept of post-traumatic growth?" And I said, no, I haven't. I'm aware of post-traumatic stress disorder. And he said, yes, but this term post-traumatic growth, I think it's what you and your wife are going through, somehow transmuting the pain and suffering from this journey into something impactful and helpful. And that began the call we felt to something greater, the birth of the Endurant movement. So I know I'm going on and on here, but for my family and I, the grief is still very present. And in fact, we're actually going through the process of my dad's transition. It's hardly been a year since my son. But alongside this grief, we're experiencing these moments of growth and new purpose, like building the nonprofit, creating the show. But until we read about your work and the frameworks, we were just experiencing. I mean, how do your frameworks help people make sense of this growth that is possible amidst the unthinkable?
Well, a couple of things strike me. One is when you were talking about autism as a disorder and how you dropped the D. It's the same kind of thing when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
Because I tell people that the symptoms and the things that they're going through in the aftermath of stress and trauma are normal human reactions. This is what happens when you face human beings with something so horrible. We react this way. So it's not a disorder exactly. It's just, what happens when you injure someone with psychological stress. Just like if you injure a body in some way, it has a reaction. And we don't say that the body is disordered. We say it's been injured because of a situation. It's had to confront. So we drop the D too. We say post-traumatic stress, all right, certainly can lead to growth. So how does that happen? One way it happens is through what you just described, with the kind of support you got and people rallying around you, the sort of companionship you found through this.
Yes.
That makes a big difference in
Yes.
terms of how people proceed through something of this sort. And so that's one thing that makes a difference. And then the other thing is, just like you discovered, you have to know that that this is possible, that this kind of growth is possible. It really helps to know that that's another pathway that you can follow, that it's not all about disorder. So in some of our presentations at Boulder Crest, we often use a quote from a woman named Mandy Piper, whose loved one was was killed in a terrorist attack in San Bernardino, California, a few years back.
Yeah.
And she said, you got to know that post-traumatic growth can exist so that you can travel that path. People need to know about this. And so I think there's some truth to that, although a lot of people, like you, were following this path before you even knew the term or had the concept, but you were living it in your own life. So this is a natural human experience also, to respond to trauma with changes. You can't go through these kinds of events and remain unchanged. You can't go back to square one, status quo, after having gone through things like this. You're going to change. And some of the changes are really painful and negative. But then there's the other part of the changes that can be something more and different that you've ever experienced before, that are valuable, and that you look back on and you say, well, it's a terrible thing, but I also have learned something about how to live life, how to live it, what's important, my priorities, and all that. So there's that, and that is helpful to be around people who are supportive of that and help you recognize it. So your friend David was so helpful to you by noticing, by seeing what was happening to you, by just, I don't know, giving you that kind of feedback. Say, Neal, look at you. Look what you're doing. Look how you are. Look at you. So sometimes we need someone from the outside to look at us and tell us what they're seeing. And they're seeing some wonderful and positive things.
Yes, very much so. Thank you for sharing that. And so, there were many days, especially early on, when we just didn't know if we'd make it through or how to make it through. It just is so devastating. And in your work, how do you help people recognize that growth might be unfolding even when it feels invisible or messy? Or like you were sharing earlier, I see it often sometimes in some of the support groups where it almost feels more comfortable to stay in that victimization.
Well, we have a choice when we're victimized to decide if we're going to be victims. So we can be victimized, but we don't have to be victims. There's another writer named Edith Edgar, and Edith Edgar is a wonderful woman who wrote a book called The Choice. She's a Holocaust survivor, and she talks about this very eloquently, about victimization versus victimhood. So she says, we all get victimized in life. Some terrible things can happen to us. But we have a choice about whether we want to remain victims in the aftermath of that. But this is a tough journey. That's why we talk about post-traumatic growth as a result of the struggle with traumatic events. Struggle is an important word. And so it doesn't happen quickly or easily. And you're just looking at a snapshot of a person in time in the aftermath of traumas that they've been through. And you don't necessarily know what that person is going to look like maybe 6 months later or 6 years later. They may look very different. So this growth process takes some time for people. And you may not be there to see what's happening further down the pathway and how they change.
There's so many nuggets in what you've just shared there, and this idea of a choice around being a victim is so opening and breakthrough for me, because I feel like until you shared that, I've accepted that I'm a victim, but have chosen to behave in a different way. But if I'm understanding you correctly, what the decision is actually, what it really actually is, whether or not we choose to be a victim. So along the lines of what you were saying before, what I feel, and I've been sharing so much, is the beauty and the growth and the connections, the calling that I've been pulled towards, the people that I've met, the cohorts, the experiences that I've found, the depth of pain and connection I felt with my wife and friends. It's so profound. I feel like it's a gift, a blessing. Now, without question, I would trade it to go back and be less awake or evolved. But I really resonate. If I'm understanding you correctly, it's not even that I'm choosing to do this as a victim. The real decision is to not be a victim of the circumstances. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. That's, of course, if we look at what we talk about as spiritual and existential change.
Yeah.
I mean, the existential issue here is that you can't go back in time and redo this and make things the way you want it to be.
No.
So you don't have that choice. But you have a choice about how it's going to go into the future in your life. And so you can exercise that choice. And the hard thing as a parent whose child has died would be to say that something good has come out of all this without giving some kind of impression to anybody that this was a good thing that happened. That's the distinction.
That's the distinction.
And you just made it very clearly. Yeah. See? And I think a lot of parents I've talked to have really had a struggle of getting to the point of growth because it feels like a betrayal of their child in some way.
Yes.
To remain in misery. That would be the way to honor their child, to be in misery. And only later can they see, oh, there's another way to honor my child, and that's to live well. And not only that, but to maybe be of service in some way to other people who are struggling. That might be a way to honor my child's life, rather than remain in misery and grief only. Not to say that isn't part of it, but not have that be the only part of the story.
Yeah. It's so powerful and profound. And for me, selfishly and personally, it's so validating because I struggle with those things, with those same some of those same thoughts. And yet when I serve, when I help other people or I get feedback that it's helping, it helps me so much, even though it feels selfish. And I'm glad because I have one of your quotes here and we really kind of touched on it. It's not the trauma itself that causes growth. It's the struggle with the aftermath, the hard emotional work of integrating what's been lost and what's still possible, right? I remember my early thoughts were like, I failed as a parent. And, you hear this all the time. The number one thing is to protect your child, right? And if I can't protect my child, I failed. And I'm fortunate that I struggled with that regret for a short period of time. But it's that sitting with that hard emotional part of the actual trauma. But then the gift is the possibility to integrate that with what's still possible. There's so much duality in this experience of carrying and living with pain or regret and yet the possibility to create, I don't know, babbling on, but when it was early in that, it was like, well, this is, people are like, no. And I was like, well, here, let's play it out. Like if, my best days are behind me. And if someone try and convince me otherwise, and I'd say, well, yeah, even if that's a beautiful experience when my daughter gets married again, Anthony won't be there. And so I was stuck in the negative loops. But when you're open to the separation of the trauma with the integration of what's possible, it creates the opportunity for destiny as opposed to struggle and pain.
I think you said something really important about the duality, because being able to grasp post-traumatic growth does require people to appreciate this paradox that two things can be present at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I was just talking about grief can be part of the experience while there is growth as well. So you have to be able to see that these two opposites can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you're in the midst of the misery of something, it is hard to see that there's another aspect to this that's possible. So it can take a while. It can take some support from other people. It can take examples. It can take a reframing or a new perspective on things. You know, you might have to read something that clicks. Somebody says something that clicks, or you just slog through enough to start to get a glimpse of, oh, maybe there is something meaningful after all. I'm starting to get a glimpse of that. However it starts to happen, you start to see that you can appreciate this paradox.
You can appreciate this paradox. And then it becomes so beautiful because then there's not this sense of I have to go back, or grief is a season that then somehow I complete, but this ability to carry both. Something I've really been sitting with, that I think this feels like a good spot to discuss it, is that it seems that not everyone experiences growth after trauma. Some people stay in the suffering, stay in the pain, and I feel very fortunate because the Endurant movement, we're focused on awareness and saving lives. But in this way, I mean, you and I are talking, and we're transmitting the possibility to experience post-traumatic growth and something beautiful coming out of trauma. But I'll share with you, Doctor, where I struggle the most is in support groups, whether they be online or more specifically in person. On the one hand, a support group for parents of who have lost children to suicide. There's no other place where, no matter how or who has helped me to what extent, there's no other place than with another parent who has lost their child in this way that do I feel that belonging, that sameness. Yet at the same time, in these one-on-one or group situations, I'm finding an abundance of shares of the struggle, the suffering. I think about this one group that I'm in on Facebook, and this woman and I joined about the same time. We lost our kids at the same time, and it's 14 months now, and it's still so much pain. And in this support groups, like, oh, I was with so and so, and they didn't understand. And then the 10 of us around are like, yes, I can't believe that. And on the one hand, I feel there's empathy there and there's a mutual commonality and connection, but I leave those interactions feeling like, but then we still stuck with that suffering. Is it possible to cultivate in some way this possibility to grow and transform, or is it more of a timing thing?
I think it's both. You have to give yourself time, and yet you can cultivate it. I remember this is pretty extraordinary, but I remember a couple who told me that on the night after their son was killed in a motor vehicle accident, they turned to each other and they said, "This is too horrible for something good not to come of this." And they were deciding that within hours after their son was killed.
Wow.
Now that's extraordinary.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah. Okay. But that was a choice that they decided to make, saying, you know what? We're gonna have to do this in a way where it's not going to define the rest of our lives as just a miserable, meaningless experience because he's gone. Mm-hmm. We have to do this different than that. So sometimes people make that very clear to themselves and essentially um, create a pathway for themselves to that. So that's a possibility. But more often than not, it sneaks up on people. And the way it sneaks up is if they get support and kindness and a good listener along the way, they start to feel connected, like you're talking about those connections that you have with other people. So these connections start to develop. So that starts to make you feel like, well, maybe there's something worthwhile still in this world through connections like that, and the feeling that comes to those connections. And then the other part of it, the flip side, is you find yourself saying or doing something in the midst of your grief that seems to help somebody.
Yeah.
That they appreciate you. And you start to say, I never thought that in my miserable circumstance I could ever have anything left to give that would benefit anybody. But I guess I did right there. Yes. So you start to get a sense of, well, maybe I've still got something to offer in this life, in this world. So maybe you get that. So with these little glimpses, you can end up building on it. You can, and usually the building, which you've sort of described in some ways already, usually the building comes through relationships with other people. What you receive and what you give. And so that starts building. And once you find yourself in some kind of community of people where you can experience a sense of, being understood and understanding others, then there's possibilities in this. Possibilities that life could have some meaning or purpose. Because when you lose a child and you start, that's, for most people, that's been maybe their top priority meaning or purpose, is to see their child into a good life. And when that gets ripped away, you start to wonder, what's the point of anything else? So you gotta create something, some kind of meaning and purpose, even if it doesn't quite match up to what you've lost.
I think that's a powerful distinction in so much of what I've consumed about your work, is that new meaning making and taking that shatter or this dream of what you thought your life would be. And it is really extraordinary how in a moment that changes, but this opportunity to, and we've experienced it more in bits and pieces, but rapidly because of the community. And then also through the spiritual awakening that's occurring as well, this realization that could be meaningful to impact other families, right? We've come to become aware of so much of our work and experiences, the lived experience that we're having through post-traumatic growth. But what we've also come to realize is the high correlation between high functioning autism and suicide. And it was not something that was made aware to us at the centers for autism. And then they weren't aware of the mental health aspects or weren't trained on it. And then at the mental health facilities, they weren't aware of the autism. So our mission is to close the gap between neurodiversity and suicide. And then also sharing this post-traumatic growth, but that in some way, and we feel this from Anthony, we believe we've heard the calling from him as well, that we as his parents can take this small amount of pain of his loss because of its impact of something greater, that we might be able to save other lives who are facing the same thing. And when I listen to myself say it seems kind of cliche, or like in my head, I was like, oh, it's a bereaved parent. But in my core and in my physiology and my soul, I feel it to be true, not as a coping mechanism so much as a calling to something greater.
Yes.
I'm speaking without a question, but I know you're following me. And I think what I'm getting towards is, I think you shared somewhere about the the difference of planes, or maybe being on a different plane. Like I don't feel like I'm in heaven. I definitely still feel here, but I don't feel quite here. I feel in this different place with a greater understanding of how the meaning I choose about the days that I have left, the impact that I could have in a greater way.
Yeah, I think when you talk about being on a different plane, um, I think this is part of the experience of change where, again, as I sort of mentioned before, you can't really go back to the way you saw things before. This changes your whole understanding of what it means to be a person and how to live a life. You just can't go back to your old perspective. Um, so it's almost like there's this catastrophic um, change where something is just broken, and you can't put those pieces together the same. They just don't glue back together
They
to
don't.
make it the same as it used to be.
No.
Now you live on this different plane. It can be like, I don't know, there's all sorts of metaphors you have to use talking about these things because it's so nuanced and hard, but it's almost like if there was like an earthquake and there's a tectonic plate that shot up, and separated from another one, and now
Yes.
you gotta live on that one,
Yeah.
it's your own personal earthquake.
Yes. That analogy resonates with me, and also in a conversation with this same friend, David G, and my wife and his wife. I'm a spiritual being, but I don't fancy myself as evolved as them. And it was like they were describing, like, Anthony pulled us into this new portal, and I feel like I'm like
Yes.
just being pulled into it. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I wonder, like, if some of the seeds were being planted early on, like for us, maybe we didn't have the language for it yet, but moments of connection or clarity showed up for us in surprising ways and continue to show up for us much in the same way or in this interview. But in your work, what creates the most fertile ground for those seeds of post-traumatic growth to take root, to take root and begin to grow? Like, how can we help create those conditions for ourselves or someone we love?
Well, I think it is helpful to be open to new experience,
Mm,
because this is a new experience.
yeah.
And people who just hate it and can't tolerate it and just want to shut it down or withdraw from it, um, are denying themselves the opportunity for this growth. So being open to novelty essentially is
Mm,
is helpful, and there are some people who are just more like that, um, and there's there's a personality dimension called openness to experience. Um, so some people are just more naturally like that, but I think you can recognize in yourself in the aftermath of these things that cultivating that sort of openness is important. Also, openness to other people, openness to these connections, letting people care for you, and to remember to care for others despite your own pain, instead of going inward and withdrawing from other people. So that kind of openness is important. Well, um, and and another thing I just want to say, what's traumatic in all these things is not only the loss of your son, but also the loss of the kind of life that you thought you were going to be living, and the kind of future that you would have, the way things are going to go, what you and your
yes.
wife were going to experience in the future with Anthony around and him growing older and his future developing. You had a whole sense of that's the way it's going to be because you just described this amazing young man who was so smart, who is connected to other people, who is so healthy in all these ways, physically. And I mean, he sounds like an amazing person. And you
Yeah.
just had a sense of a future that, you know, he was just gonna he was just gonna make something great out of his future the way he was going. That's what it sounds like.
Yes.
And and so what's also traumatic is um, the loss of this expected future,
Yes.
um, and and sort of what we call the core beliefs that we all assume in our lives, like what kind of people we are, what kind of future we're going to have, what kind of world we live in, how controllable things are, how predictable things are, all these things that we think we kind of got it, we kind of know by the time we're adults, especially, and we assume to be true. And then these things happen, and it's like all that's just called into question. It's like, I don't have control like I thought. It's not
No.
predictable. Life was going to be like this. It's not. It's like the whole darn thing is just, called into question. And, I was talking about the earthquake before, and one metaphor that I often use in describing this is like this all these beliefs that we carry with us um, are like a psychological infrastructure that
Mm,
we count on to guide ourselves through our lives.
yeah.
And then all this is up for grabs. It's like a psychological earthquake that ruins the infrastructure. It's like all
Yeah.
the buildings have come down, the electric grid's wiped out, the roads are buckled. You can't live in this place, you
No.
know,
No.
and you can't live in this place that's you psychologically because it's all been screwed up by this
Yeah.
earthquake. You don't know what to believe, what to think, can't understand it. And so you have to rebuild that. And people are open to that rebuilding, just like you have to rebuild a city and
Yes.
rebuild it in a different way, not the same old way so that it's going to come tumbling down again, but rebuild it in a new way, a better way, a way that makes more sense, that accommodates what's happened and what could happen in the future. That's the wisdom, it's the wisdom that
Yeah.
ends up coming out of this. But you have to figure that out. It is not an easy thing to figure out. I mean, people can offer you all sorts of ideas, and here's what I believe, and here's this spiritual belief, and people offer you all sorts of things, and you can pick and choose among all that, and you can think and explore and be open to it all, but you're going to have to rebuild something that works for you, and it may not be exactly like what other people think or believe, but it's got to work for you. So that's the thing you have to cultivate. That's what you have to work on. It's hard work.
It's hard work, and yet there's so many nuggets in what you've shared. I want to try and go back and remember a few of them, and they may be out of order, and this is potentially going backwards. But what you shared, yes, like this life we envisioned with Anthony and all he would become, and to get married, have children, these types of things, and it's all just blown to bits, and those pieces don't go back together, and yet there's one in particular that we've been blessed to experience, or that I have, is in the last couple of years, he's so aware of his challenge with suicidal ideation, and he was like, Dad, I want to do a podcast with you, and I think we could speak to it together, and so that's a lot of how this has come about. Like, I've never done a podcast. This is not my jam. This isn't my thing. And then we found like a video of him in my office doing it. And so I'm so fortunate that there are some seeds that I get to carry on, but by and large, the rest is blown to bits. And what I likened it to, what I shared with someone, is like I feel like I'm born again. Now, not in any religious sort of way, but like I'm birthed, and I've come out of the canal, and there's all this possibility of a life ahead of me. But unlike a baby that's starting with a blank slate, I have some wisdom or some experiences that I can now call upon within these new possibilities. And it's so fascinating when you talk about giving and receiving, to think about staying at the Ronald McDonald House where my wife and daughter volunteer all the time, or the people that have come and helped us. And At first it was very hard for my wife and I to receive that help. And then it turns out like that help was the lifeblood. The purpose behind all this is I want to find the people who aren't blessed with the people that want to help them like we have. And just and then also, like you were saying, and then when the time comes, the possibility to help others. One of the things that my friends most often say is as recent as a drive yesterday with a buddy of mine. He's like, oh, I'm going through it with my wife, but it's not at all like you about losing your son or your dad, transitioning now. And I'm like, no, man, please share it with me. It would mean so much to hear about something else. There's no comparing. And it felt so, I could see just the freedom open up in him and to be able to connect and hopefully add some value to help him navigate a marital situation. So it's just interesting to see all the things that you're describing and you're helping me bring them to a conscious awareness so that I too might carry your work forward in a more meaningful way.
I want to say something what you're just talking about there with your friend, because you're so right that it's not fair, it's not right to compare traumas.
Mm-hmm.
Some people can say, well, losing a child is the worst thing. And I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
You'd say that. But that doesn't mean that other kinds of events can't be just as shattering for people and difficult. Right. So this is where a lot of people start to think they don't deserve attention and help because their situation isn't bad enough. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know how many people come to my office and they say, well, I know you deal with trauma, and I'm sure so many other people have a lot worse circumstances than me. I say, hey, listen, that's not what we're here to do. Mm-hmm. I'm not comparing your circumstance to anybody else. And so, people, and it's interesting. I was just thinking about we at Boulder Crest, we've made a documentary that includes the stories of a lot of people that we've worked with in our organization. And there's one guy who served on a submarine in the Navy for many years, who had gone through one of our programs called Warrior Path. And he said, I learned about your programs and I didn't think I deserved to go through them because I hadn't been injured in combat. And so it wasn't bad enough for me. And it wasn't until I went through the program and were with other veterans that I learned that I belonged. That I belonged there and I needed it. That I had some real struggles I had to deal with. But up till then, I didn't think I deserved it because other people had worse circumstances than me. You find this again and again and again. It's so unfortunate. It's the way that people avoid getting the help that they could benefit from. It's terrible.
You said it a couple times, the word deserve.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's another D word that keeps coming up for me, like disorder. And you with post-traumatic stress disorder is people often tell me, oh, you guys don't deserve this. You're such good people. And it's like, I get it. It feels more platitude. And then also too, how you were sharing it, where people feel like they don't deserve the help because it's reached this, they feel like they haven't reached some level of threshold of trauma. And it's just like disorder. It's like another one of those words that I could just wish we could get rid of so that people wouldn't put these blocks in front of themselves to access what could really help them.
Yes, so we've identified some of them. We've identified the idea that people keep themselves in a victim sort of stance. Mm-hmm. That's one way people get stuck. Another way is they don't reach out for help because they don't deserve it. They don't think that they have it bad enough. It's sort of the flip side of that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Flip side of it.
And then another thought I had is, our relationship to time, to people, to what matters, it feels different. And some of our relationships have really deepened with Anthony's passing. Some of our existing relationships have really deepened with Anthony's passing. We've been overwhelmed with an abundance of new relationships, especially through the work of Endurant and folks like yourselves saying yes, which is helping the larger community and ourselves individually. But also, I feel like we've lost some friends that couldn't hold what we're going through. And I don't feel like I struggle with it so much because I've heard so much that you might lose friends. So I understand it in that way. But yet, let me take that back. I do. I mean, I wonder if you have any advice around it. Like on the one hand, like I get it. And my heart hurts for me and them and that relationship. And I'm so overwhelmed with the love from these new relationships, but I can't help but feel like there's something I'm leaving behind. I mean, is it something we should just set down or try and reconnect with those people? Do you have any ideas around that?
It's been about 20 years ago, I wrote a book called Helping Bereaved Parents. And it's a post-traumatic growth sort of approach to parental bereavement. And one of the things that I was struck by in listening to so many bereaved parents is that, I mentioned that in the book, is that it's like half of our support group discussions seem to revolve around what happened to their relationships with other people. And it was either that other people that surprised them with being supportive, or other people disappointed them with not being there for them.
Yes.
And it was very confusing because some of the people that they thought they would be closest to and get the most support from sort of backed off. Or that people were there at the beginning for a little while, but then disappeared after, I don't know, a few months or something like that, suddenly not around.
Yes.
And it took a long time for people to understand what might have been going on with that. So it can be a lot of things. Some people, some parents were saying they felt like they were lepers or something. Like, people don't want to be around someone. They might catch this terrible kind of fate or destiny or something. You want to be around it.
It's contagious.
Yeah, like it's contagious. Or some people were saying that they felt like other people didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to be helpful. And that's where they just offered these empty platitudes, like you were saying. And they just weren't comfortable enough with it, didn't know how to be close. And other people were just afraid of emotion. Like the emotions are so deep. They just can't tolerate deep emotions in some way. There's all kinds of reasons why people back away. And it has to do with those people, not with your situation. It's the things that, the weaknesses and vulnerabilities in people that they haven't come to terms with yet. And that's just, that's just part of this process. No matter what the traumatic event might be. And there are all sorts of different ones where this happens. It could be divorce, it could be a disability, it could be cancer. There's all sorts of traumatic events where people find that the people they thought were going to be close to them just can't do it.
And I appreciate the authenticity with which you're sharing that, because I feel like on some small level, like it's something I want to like fix or save some of those relationships. And I want to say in my personal experience, I feel very fortunate that there are far fewer who were close, who I thought would be running towards me, who haven't. It's less of that. What I'm shocked and grateful for is the number of people that seemed more like maybe acquaintances or now new relationships that have run towards me. But what I was struck with in when you were sharing it was like, wait a minute, maybe this is just as simple as relationships coming and going at other points in my life for, in many ways, the reasons that you've said, but the attention put on the nature of this somehow shifts my perception of it. Like an example I would give is like when we first got home after 9 weeks and I started walking the dog again, and I had this feeling like people were walking away from me or saw me and wanted to go in a different direction. And within a few days, what I started to realize was that wasn't really actually true. It was more a story in my head around how I assumed it was for others in this situation. And then so like when I let that go and just decided like I was going to walk as opposed to be thinking, I'm actually walking to try and clear my head, not be worried about if I'm going to run into something or somebody that's going to be awkward, that it's like people, start coming over and interacting. So I don't know, it feels like in so much of your work, it's coming back to this simplicity.
Yeah, Neal, I think when you're in a situation like you are in, you can end up defining yourself entirely as a bereaved parent.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going through the world as a bereaved parent rather than as Neal. And you can assume that everything that happens to you and every interaction and everything has to do with being a bereaved parent rather than just Neal. So I think that's the shift that starts to happen that gets things kind of confused.
Not only does it make sense, it hits every fiber of my being and in my heart. Because I want to be able to relate to people as a bereaved parent who might benefit it, but I don't want to be defined as a bereaved parent. It just feels more like an evolution, a rapid evolution of Neal and who I am and what I have to give. So yeah, not only does it make sense, obviously it's hit me in a very deep way. Thank you.
Right, because it's a part of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to figure out, again, that integration of this horrible fact of your life and experience of your life into your identity. So what's it going to be? Is it going to be, I am a bereaved parent, or I am Neal as well as being a bereaved parent, or I am a friend, or I'm a husband. I'm bereaved parent is part of it, but is it the whole thing? Is that the way I'm going to present myself in the world? I mean, that integration, figuring out where that fits and how much of yourself is identified that way is something that you work out over time. So do I go to the grocery store being a bereaved parent? Is that appropriate?
Mm-hmm.
When I'm doing my podcast, yes, I am a bereaved parent, but maybe there's other times I'm a little less of it. I mean, you got to figure it out how that.
Yeah. And integration is such a powerful word that's really resonating with me. And it also kind of ties so much of this together too, about it not being the event. I'm not defined by the trauma. It's what's opening up, right? And this is actually something I've heard you share that resonated with me. The pain doesn't go away, but people tell us to become more passionate, more present, more open to the fragility and beauty of life. And that's what struck me about what you shared about that distinction between bereaved parent and Neal, right? It's the I'm intimately aware of the fragility of life, but also the beauty and how I show up. And I'm also so grateful for my dear friends, because I don't have to show up as anything other than myself with them. And I could just be one of the guys hanging out, going to shows, listening to music, going on road trips, going snowboarding. And if I bring it up, they're there for me. So it kind of expands almost upon this duality. It's just another layer of who I am. And it's opened up this whole world with me. And I'll just share with you, one of the things I was discussing with Anthony in the later years is he was trying to find purpose too. And he just seemed to be like, I have to know what I'm going to do. I want to be a Navy SEAL. I want to serve my country. And then I want to go into psychology. And then and I'm like, Anthony, you're 14, you're 15, you don't have to figure it all out. He's like, well, what do you mean? You seem like you have it all figured out. I'm like, no, like, I still don't. And I shared with him so much so that my previous career was a sales leader, an executive leader. I worked with organizations about executive leadership and sales training. And I would say to him, like, this doesn't find me. In fact, I've been doing it for 2 decades. I feel like I'm ready to let it go, that I'm wanting and craving more purposeful work. I didn't know that the moments later I'd be thrust into more purposeful work, but it almost feels like a dance of aspects that make up my identity, parts of me. I don't know. I'm just sharing that with you because I'm finding this personally profound.
Yeah, I think that, all of us have to recognize the different parts of our identity, and they change over time for sure. Just as you're saying, there's parts that are as important to you now as they were before, and so you redefine yourself.
Yeah,
and you've got choices in that matter. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're a teenager and trying to figure out what you want to be when you grow up, you're thinking that maybe you do that once and it's done. But
Right.
The rest of us adults, we find out that a lot of times during adulthood, we ask ourselves the question, what do I want to be when I grow up? We're still asking the same question,
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
changing,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Spiritual or existential growth, that pillar you were talking about, and you shared that for many, trauma initiates that spiritual quest, not always religious, but a deep desire to make meaning from suffering and reconnect with something larger. I've found that to be wildly liberating in my experience. I struggled with religion and beliefs, and I feel like another blessing and beauty of this whole experience is transcending, figuring out which lens is right, and just letting go of all of that and just realizing how deeply connected we are by some greater power, call it spirit or universe or whatever. But I'm just curious if you could share a little bit about your experience over the decades with that pillar of spiritual or existential growth.
Existential, kind of in philosophy, refers fairly simply to, why do we exist? What's our existence about? Why are we here? And we have to, as individuals living our lives, figure out the answer to that question for ourselves. Why are we here? And people who are suicidal are often questioning, why should I be here? What good am I? What am I doing? Am I burdened to people? Am I going to help? Does it make any sense? Is it just all about pain? All those kinds of existential questions. And maybe Anthony was, grappling with those kinds.
He was.
And that's dangerous, in a way.
Yes.
But also, it's just part of being human to come to terms with those things. And when certain events happen in life, we're thrust up against those questions in a really painful way. And so we've got to, as you said before, make some meaning out of this. And it's a discovery process, but it's also a creative process. We can't just kind of wait around and something's going to find us and it's going to sort of happen or come in an enlightenment, or we got to create something. It's got an active component to it, and the active component, I think, often has to deal with finding ways to make a contribution, have an impact in the world. Because existentially, if we don't have some kind of impact on the world. Like we just go through life and it doesn't matter that we were here. Why should it matter that we continue to live? You know,
Yeah.
that's the thing. So we have to find a way to matter. And we could matter to an individual person that we love. We could matter to a whole bunch of people. Um, we can matter in a lot of different ways, but you have to find some way to be of service and have an impact and have a mission in life. You know, something that is worth getting up in the morning and doing because it's going to make a difference somehow to somebody. And then our mission could be just being kind to people as we go through our daily lives. You know, I'm going to get up today and I'm going to interact with people in a way where I'm going to try to bring a little bit of a smile to their face or have them remember some interaction with me with a warm feeling. That could be your mission. You know, we've got to have something that has an impact. So that's pretty much an existential part of this, being of service in some way.
That's powerful. So, because I didn't have this down as a question, but it sounds like the contribution is what unlocks that spiritual or existential growth.
Yeah,
Do,
yeah, absolutely. So, for example, in our programs at Boulder Crest, again, we serve first responders and military service members and veterans. These are people that have had a life of service, but either they've had to leave it behind because they've left the military, and now they don't know what kind of service. What am I supposed to do? Who am I? How am I supposed to serve now? Or they're first responders who are serving all the time, but just constantly confronted with trauma and terrible things, um, which debilitate them, and they're not taking care of themselves. Um, so we have to help them recognize the importance of their service and how they continue to be of value. And and all of us need that. All of us need
yes.
to see our value to other people and that we matter. We have to have a mission of some kind. And again, it could be like you're doing with your podcast or foundation. It sounds pretty grand, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but not everybody's going to be able to do that or want to do that. Um, the missions could be very personal, and and no one else might recognize them as long as you recognize them.
Yeah.
So it's all kinds of ways. And then what you're doing, Neal, I'm sure that what you're doing is something that you hope has a impact on the personal level. Like it wouldn't be
Yes.
worth doing if you weren't seeing the personal responses that
Yes.
people have to this, right?
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's I find it sometimes I wonder because it's so I feel like sometimes it's selfish because from that very first All Faiths Welcome prayer circle, it's been helpful to me. But the thing that keeps me going is when I get the feedback from others, how it's impacted them. This helped me in a conversation with my son. I was able to talk about mental health with my daughter, or the work that we're doing we're creating a whole version of this podcast that are the teen voices. And that's what keeps me coming back, because I feel like the things that I'm getting to help me have become part of me, but it's that ongoing and seeing that proliferation of help for other people that's really, really keeps me going and keeping it as a part of me. Well, listen, I know we're coming kind of down to it, but through this movement, we're really starting to envision a new future, not the one we imagined, which we've talked about, but one we're choosing. How do you think post-traumatic growth supports people in beginning to see new possibilities and pathways forward? Have you seen, or do you have any examples, not to put pressure on you, but anyone that's done it in some unique ways. You've shared a couple of unique ways. Someone who made a decision right away. Others, it takes some time. Other unique ways that might come to mind?
There's so many stories.
I bet.
One thing I just want to mention is that at Boulder Crest, we have a book called Transformed by Trauma, Stories of Post-Traumatic Growth. And what we do in that book is we've done interviews with people we know, and these are mostly military service members or their family members. And they describe their encounters with situations in their lives that propelled them towards post-traumatic growth. So you hear it in their own words, and then what we do is we use those words and their experiences to highlight this process of growth and how it happened and what it looked like. So it's meant for the general reader, and those kinds of stories could be useful. So, for example, there's a woman named Leslie Main who son was a soldier who took his own life after he left the Army, and she started something called the PTSD Foundation. And what that stands for is, listen to what it stands for: Permission to Start Dreaming.
Oh, wow.
And she started that in the aftermath of her son's death, after she started to wonder, what's the purpose of my own life now? She didn't feel like she had a reason to live anymore. She started to think about killing herself. But she decided to try to do something to be of service to other people, other parents who had gone through this. So now her foundation delivers some of our Boulder Crest programs out on the West Coast. People work hard and go through hell to find some way to find purpose and meaning and find a new mission. And you can't do it by yourself. You have to find someone else to connect with, someone else to help you, someone else to do it with, someone who gets it, gets you, believes in you, sees the value in you. So don't go it alone. That's the big thing. And of course, that's the biggest danger in suicide, when people start to think that they have to go it alone and they have to figure it all out alone and all of that. So that's a pathway to disaster. So people got to find their supporters, their helpers, what we call the expert companions. That's what we call them. Expert companions, those people who are expert at companionship, being there, seeing your value, and sticking with you over the long haul, and listening to all it is that you have to somehow come to terms with, and therefore, out of that, define your mission.
It's so powerful, and I'm glad that you shared that story. It was so helpful, and it unlocked something into me that I had lost sight of. In 2001, I got sober, and I went through the 12-step program. And you acknowledge yourself as an addict, and the program saved my life. I want to be very clear about that. About 4 or 5 years later, when I moved from San Francisco to San Diego, the sobriety and recovery in San Francisco was tremendous. My sponsor was like, we don't stop partying, we're just not drinking or using drugs. And that had such a distinction for me because we were living. When I got down to San Diego, the program was a little bit different. It was in hospitals. Kids weren't as open to being sponsored like I was. But long story short, it was Deepak Chopra who shared with me, as I was blessed to work with him for a number of years. He said, Neal, I wonder, are you still at a point where you're concerned about picking up and dying? Or are you starting to think about what life might look like moving forward and what it might mean to grow and live? And it struck me when you shared how the woman transformed the acronym into PTSD, because if we stay in that, going all the way back to what we were saying about labels, it cuts off the possibility to grow. I'm really glad that you shared that.
So, Neal, I just want to invite you and other people to go to our bouldercrest.org website. We've got all sorts of videos there, stories of people. We've got all kinds of reading material, articles for professionals and lay people. We got things about our programs. It's a great website with a whole bunch of stuff, and you can poke around in there and find all sorts of things, all based on post-traumatic growth. The whole thing at Boulder Crest is based on this concept, which is supported by a ton of research over the years. This is all empirically supported work. So we've got that, and all of our programs at Boulder Crest are for free.
Wow.
It's all funded through donors, very generous people who have supported the development of our organization. So anybody who is a veteran or first responder who wants to go through our programs, it's for free. So I just want to put that plug in, okay?
That was going to be my final question. Is there anything you'd want to do or share, or anything that we can help you with? And I'm glad you shared that. Is there anything you would add to it? Because I did want to ask that question and have that plug.
Well, that's what I wanted to say, to make
Thank
sure
you.
people understood what Boulder Crest was about. And we are also dedicated to preventing suicide, because we think that living well, living a meaningful life, and getting clear on your value and purpose is the best suicide prevention that you can get. When you have a life like that you can share with other people and be connected, those things help make people see that they got to stay here and do their work.
I'm so aligned with you on that, and so grateful for the time and value that you've provided in this time together. It's helped me tremendously, and I'm certain it's going to help our audience. And I'm also grateful for what you shared at the end, because one of the things my wife and I decided early on, where we still not, it's becoming more clear where the Endurant movement is going and what it means. But one thing we came up with early on is we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So I'm grateful that you shared about the opportunity to go to the website, and for us to send other people to the website. And we could discuss this offline or not, but I was really hopeful that maybe we could borrow or share, because even though your focus is on first responders and veterans, which I'm so grateful it is that the principles are so applicable, and we'd be grateful to borrow them or point people to them as resources that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, by gosh,
Well, that's why so. Yes, we serve veterans and first responders in our program, but we're really trying to get this post-traumatic growth message out to the community in general. It's something that applies to everybody who goes through struggles in life, and we try to make it clear that we're talking about people going through struggles. You don't have to have a diagnosis of any sort or defined as trauma. We all have our struggle, and so all this material applies to people generally, and we're trying to make a difference in our view of mental health in general, the mental health system, so that we can get people oriented in this direction.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all the work that you and everyone at your organization are doing. It's the most meaningful work. I didn't realize it at the time, but when the opportunity came about to do the push-ups for veterans lost to suicide, my son was so young, but he jumped at it. He's the one who pointed it out to me, was doing on my back in all these different places. And it's just fascinating to me how full circle we've come. And just, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and you have my commitment, because this is the mission of the Endurant movement, is to get this out. And I'm so glad that it already exists. And I would like do everything I can to multiply the impact of your work, because it's not something that has to be researched or figured out. It exists. It just needs to be shared on a greater scale.
Well, thank you very much. And I invite you and anybody else who's listening to us to be in touch with us at Boulder Crest and to keep in touch. Make use of what we've got to offer. That's what it's there for.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tedeschi.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, Neal. Enjoyed our conversation.
Me too, very much so. Thank you. Thank you so much to Dr. Richard Tedeschi for joining us and for offering such clarity, humility, and heart around what it really means to grow after trauma. This wasn't just a clinical conversation for me. It was quite personal. Because as my family and I continue living inside our grief, we're also beginning to see the shape of something else, something we didn't expect: meaning, purpose, connection. And this conversation gave us a new language for it. If today's episode stirred something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a quiet sense of possibility, know that you're not alone. Grief doesn't end in a straight line, and growth doesn't erase what's been lost, but something new can begin even in the wreckage. I encourage you to explore Dr. Tedeschi's work more deeply, his books, the websites he mentioned at the Boulder Crest Foundation, and his decades of research on how people change after profound loss. If you or someone you love is in emotional distress, please reach out. You can call or text 988 for free and confidential support anytime. And if this conversation meant something to you, I invite you to share it with a friend, a partner, or anyone navigating their own pain. You can find tools, stories, and ways to support our work at endurantmovement.org, because together we're building a culture that makes space for grief and believes in the possibility of what comes after. Thank you for being with us today. We'll see you next time on The Endurance Show.
Thank you for listening to The Endurance Show. If this conversation moved you, please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To view the conversations, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And to be a part of the community, follow us at Endurant Movement. And lastly, if you feel called to support the movement and help us ensure no teen ever feels alone again, visit endurantmovement.org to learn more, and if you can, make a donation. Together we can create lasting change, one conversation, one connection at a time.